that we are being more efficient in government and still promoting Scotland's international global reputation on the world stage.
Many thanks. And we'll now move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 8914 in the name of John Swinney on the Budget Scotland number 3 bill. I invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I now call on Mr Swinney to speak to and move the motion. Mr Swinney, 14 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, the Budget Scotland number 3 bill confirms the spending plans that were set out in the draft budget, with the objectives of increasing sustainable economic growth, improving public services and supporting families and businesses at a challenging time. Despite the 11% reduction in our fiscal DEL over a 5-year period imposed by Westminster, Scotland has now experienced 6 consecutive quarters of economic growth, and we are ahead of the rest of the United Kingdom on all the key economic indicators. Consistent increases in employment levels show that the policies of the Scottish Government to create employment and boost the economy are delivering the progress required in our economic recovery strategy. Over the next 2 years, we will support the economy by securing more than £8 billion of investment in Scotland's infrastructure, supporting over 50,000 equivalent jobs across the wider economy. We will invest in our schools, our hospitals, in affordable housing, with over £970 million of investment in affordable housing in the 3 years to March 2015, and a further £120 million to help first-time buyers and existing homeowners to buy a new-build home. We will deliver greater connectivity through significant investment in our transport infrastructure and by providing superfast broadband to 95% of premises in Scotland by the end of 2017-18, exceeding the Government's targets that have been set. We will continue to invest in the transition to a low-carbon economy, and we will increase our investment in active and sustainable travel to almost £60 million from between 2014-15 and 2015-16. We will ensure that there is greater community involvement in the design and the delivery of healthy living and active travel measures as part of an integrated approach across government, reflecting the policy priorities put to me by the Scottish Green Party during the budget process. We are investing heavily in our young people, funding a record number of modern apprenticeships and assisting in the development of the key interventions to support young people into employment through the Opportunities for All initiative. We await with interest the report of the Wood Commission on developing Scotland's young workforce. I give Parliament the commitment that we will bring forward swift measures and appropriate resources to act on the final report from the Commission, in partnership with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities and Scotland's education and business communities. A consistent theme in this Government's approach to the economy is the support that we can offer to boost women's participation in the labour market. In addition to the work we are doing across our employability and education strategies, we are providing over £190 million to our partners in local government to increase early learning and childcare provision to 600 years, saving families around £700 a year. In January, we announced a further £15 million investment in 2014-15 to deliver a phased expansion of eligibility to the most vulnerable 2-year-olds and £3.5 million to enhance the skills of our childcare workforce to maintain the high quality of childcare, supporting around 2,000 jobs in Scotland. I will, yes.
Willie Rennie.
Can I particularly welcome that announcement made in January? He mentioned about the benefits there is to parents being able to get back to work. But can he also recognise that a boost in early education for young people can make a big impact on the early years? Professor James Heckman says the best educational investment is before the age of 3. Does he agree with me?
Cabinet Secretary.
I certainly accept the point that's made by Mr Rennie, and I think it accords very clearly with the thinking taken forward by my colleague Aileen Campbell as the Minister for Young People in the Early Years Collaborative, which is an excellent example of how we are encouraging and motivating all relevant players to support the nurture and development of our very youngest citizens. So the point that Mr Rennie makes in that respect is a point well made. Mr Rennie has persisted with pressing the arguments around the expansion of childcare, and I pay tribute to the constructive contribution that he has made to the budget process. Ministers have invited Mr Rennie to participate in the discussions with partners around the delivery of our commitments on childcare, and we look forward to continuing our partnership working on this particular issue to deliver the commitments that the Government has made to Parliament around expansion of early years education. This, Presiding Officer, is also a budget that delivers the measures to maintain Scotland's position as the most competitive place for doing business, with the UK's most generous package of business rates relief worth over £590 million a year offered right here in Scotland. With our partners in local government and our enterprise and skills agencies, we are investing decisively in Scotland's economic growth while ensuring that our people are qualified and able to take advantage of the opportunities that will follow. As part of our drive to deliver sustainable economic growth, the Scottish Government is determined to do all that it can to tackle inequality in our country. At a time when the UK Government seems increasingly intent on dismantling the welfare state and has presided over an 8% fall in real hourly earnings between 2009 and 2012, we have maintained our commitment to our public services and to the social wage, our social contract with the people of Scotland. The budget reflects our commitment to an NHS which is publicly owned and a local government that is properly funded, in contrast to the approach taken forward by the UK Government. To help Scottish households, we are continuing to work with our partners in local government to deliver a council tax freeze, saving the average household £1,200 by the end of this current Parliament. We are supporting our students through our commitment to free higher education, and we are maintaining free personal care, support for concessionary travel, free prescriptions and the Scottish Living Wage. And from next January, we will fund free school meals for all school children in primaries 1 to 3, benefiting around 170,000 children in total and worth £330 a year for each child to families throughout the country. These measures, Presiding Officer, will provide valuable support to people across Scotland. There will, however, be further challenges our people face, and the Scottish Government is acting to limit the extent to which the UK Government's welfare reforms undermine our approach to social partnership. Within our limited devolved powers, we have established a council tax reduction scheme in partnership with local government, which is supporting over 500,000 people who would otherwise have seen their council tax benefit cut by the UK Government. We have provided funding for advice agencies to meet the ever-increasing pressures on them, and we have created the Scottish Welfare Fund, backed by £33 million of funding to help those encountering difficulties. We are determined to do all that we can to mitigate the effects of welfare reform, but the scale of the challenge is literally enormous. Welfare reform will remove an estimated £4.5 billion from the Scottish economy over the 5 years to 2015, and the Chancellor has announced further welfare cuts over 2016-17 and 2017-18. I will do, yes.
Gavin Brown. He quotes a figure of £4.5 billion yet again. Out of that £4.5 billion, how many have the Scottish Government pledged to reverse were Scotland to become independent?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I'm accounting to Mr Brown is the damage that has been done to the people of Scotland as a consequence of our continued participation in the United Kingdom. That is the reality that Mr Brown cannot avoid. We must be clear that we will never be able to mitigate all of the damaging effects of welfare reform, and any resources we deploy to this purpose are at the expense of other services that we could support within our areas of responsibility. Over the period 2013-14 to 2015-16, this Government will spend over £244 million on alleviating the impact of welfare reform, resources we could have spent on devolved services had it not been required to safeguard vulnerable people in Scotland. One of the key elements of welfare reform that has been much in focus during the scrutiny of this budget has been on the bedroom tax. The bedroom tax is an iniquitous and damaging policy. I have had constructive discussions with the Labour Party on mitigating the effects of the bedroom tax, following their support for the budget at stage 1. I have looked carefully at this issue to ensure we have a robust way in which to offer further support. I think it is now accepted across the Chamber that the only measure available to provide money direct to tenants and to prevent them risking rent arrears and entering a position of indebtedness with significant and wider implications is through discretionary housing payments. As Parliament knows, we are limited in our ability to resource discretionary housing payments by the cap imposed by the Department of Work and Pensions. On the latest data available from the DWP, we are constrained to a legal maximum of £22.85 million, an increase from the original proposal of £20 million, and I confirm to Parliament that we are now allocating this increased budget sum today. This takes the total support that can be provided directly by local authorities to individuals to £38 million. Although this is a significant level of support, it is some £12 million short of the estimated £50 million needed to fully mitigate the bedroom tax in Scotland. The Deputy First Minister wrote to Lord Freud to ask the DWP to remove the cap on the additional funding that we can provide for discretionary housing payments. That is a simple thing for Westminster to do at absolutely no cost to them and could be completed by the 1st of April. I will do.
Cameron Brown.
I'm grateful to you for giving way. Was that the first time the Scottish Government had formally requested the lifting of the cap?
Cabinet Secretary.
The issues about the impact of the cap have been discussed at various meetings with the DWP, but the first formal request for the lifting of the cap was in the letter that we issued to the DWP on Friday. Now, we await an answer to that letter from the DWP. If a positive reply is forthcoming, we will allocate an additional £12 million to assist in mitigating the bedroom tax through discretionary housing payments. However, we are prepared to pursue other approaches in the event that the DWP refuse our request. I give Parliament the assurance today that if the DWP says no, the Scottish Government will put in place a scheme to make this additional £12 million available to social landlords, so that we need not see any evictions in Scotland this year as a result solely of the bedroom tax. Obviously, any scheme will require to be consistent with the complex legal framework which regulates these matters. That is not easy, notwithstanding the comments previously made by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury and his colleague, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Scotland. The Scottish Government must ensure, as David Mundell acknowledged yesterday, that our actions are, and I quote, subject to the clearly set out constraints of the Scotland Act 1998, close quotes. However, we are determined to put in place a lawful scheme which can be set up to provide the additional funding to social landlords to fund any shortfall that results from the bedroom tax and assist landlords so that tenants need not face eviction as a result solely of the bedroom tax. I will fund this through a reduction of £10 million in the budgetary requirements for the rail franchise, following the OBR final determination of the funding required for Network Rail, £3 million of Barnett consequentials and remaining budget exchange flexibilities. I want to be clear to the Chamber that none of the funding that I have announced here is a solution to the bedroom tax. This is about mitigation, about picking up the pieces from Westminster's iniquitous policy. The only real solution is to scrap the bedroom tax altogether, and this Government believes the only way to do that is for this Parliament to have the full powers over welfare in Scotland. So I urge all parties in this Parliament to support the approach that I have outlined today, support us in pressing the UK Government to lift the cap on discretionary housing payments to prevent people getting into the awful spiral of debt, back us in putting resources into place to support the vulnerable. Parliament can take action to pick up the pieces of a policy dreamed up in Westminster that is causing real hardship to the people of Scotland. Presiding Officer, I have listened to the views of Parliament and the country in finalising this budget and have worked constructively with all sides of the Chamber over the last few weeks to secure its passage. The Scottish Parliament has repeatedly proved its ability to take the important decisions needed to improve people's lives and to reflect our values. This budget bill demonstrates the benefits to Scotland of decisions being taken in Scotland by those who care most about Scotland. It is a budget that doesn't simply mitigate the impacts of decisions which are not in our best interests, but also protects household incomes, supports growth and protects high-quality public services, because these are the things that we value. I believe that the budget bill deserves support from across this chamber, and I commend it to Parliament and the people of Scotland.
Many thanks. I now call on Ian Gray to speak to and move Amendment 89 Mr Gray, 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When we last debated the budget, the Cabinet Secretary, in an exchange with Patrick Harvey, said this: a judgment has to be made as to whether the elements of the budget can be sufficiently considered by members and parties to be in the correct balance and therefore worthy of support, despite the fact that not all provisions within the budget may be to their liking. It is certainly the case that there are many provisions in this budget not to our liking. For a start, it fails to properly fund the government's council tax freeze, meaning that yet again it will be paid for through increased charges and reduced services for those who need them most, and the loss of thousands of local government jobs. It does not reinstate the disproportionate cuts in the further education budget, and 3,500 college places announced yesterday, however welcome, hardly compensates for the 140,000 fewer college students in our colleges today. The budget wrongly, in our view, prioritises the extension of free school meals to better off, not well off, but better off families over accelerating the provision of childcare to half of Scotland's 2-year-olds. And then there is the £1 billion worth of anti-poverty programmes which have disappeared since 2007. It is good, then, that the Cabinet Secretary is not tempted by the rather juvenile argument that to support a budget is to support its every measure, and to reject it is to reject everything in it. And in that spirit, we have seen this budget this year as an opportunity to achieve something both we, the SNP, and I think others, such as Green colleagues, for example, believe to be desirable. And that is simply an end to the impact of the bedroom tax on council and housing association tenants in Scotland. That would be the effect of Parliament passing the amendment in my name today. Now, it is worth reflecting on how far we have come already. In September, the draft budget had no money in it to alleviate the bedroom tax. The Cabinet Secretary was adamant that this was a UK government measure, which it is, and he would not let them off the hook. Of course, it was the 80,000 households affected who were left on the hook of the bedroom tax. And in fairness, by October, the government had relented and found £20 million in the budget, still short of what was required. In December, the Cabinet Secretary argued that social security legislation meant this sum could not be further increased. And when I argued otherwise, I also recall the Deputy First Minister, from a sedentary position, heckling me with the cry, "Where is the money coming from?" The fact is, I always had confidence in Mr Swinney. More confidence, it would seem, than his Cabinet colleague. Confidence that he could find the funds to complete the total £50 million package required to match the cost of the bedroom tax to Scottish tenants. And indeed, this week, the same Deputy First Minister popped up in the Daily Record to say that the money was there after all, as Mr Swinney has confirmed today, but that the DWP cap must be lifted. Now, we have always said that there are other legal and legitimate ways to use this money to help the victims of the bedroom tax. So last week, we presented to the Cabinet Secretary a proposal for an additional tenant assistance scheme with two elements, one for local authorities and one for housing associations. The proof that this can work is that it already does, in Renfrewshire Council and in East Lothian Housing Association. Both have been checked either by Audit Scotland or by lawyers, and both, in essence, do the same thing. They write off small amounts of arrears rather than paying tenants, and so they do not fall foul of benefit legislation. And, yes,
Cabinet Secretary.
I welcome his acceptance of the intervention. I wonder if Ian Gray would just reflect on what is a more desirable response to the difficulties individuals face in the bedroom tax. Would it be to increase discretionary housing payments to avoid people getting into debt, or to let people fall into debt and then write off their arrears?
Ian Gray.
I think it's clear that it's always better to avoid debt, but the important thing here is that, come what may, we do the thing which we want to do. And I have to say that the Cabinet Secretary has considered the scheme presented to him with understandable caution, but with a commendably open mind, and our amendment reflects those discussions that we have had. So, with thanks to Renfrewshire Council and to East Lothian Housing Association for their help, we are almost there. The full £50 million funding is in place, and if the DWP restriction remains, then a workable alternative exists, and our amendment today endorses the position. Now, like Mr Swinney, I want to see the actual abolition of this policy rather than its mitigation. I want to see it abolished by a Labour government next year. I understand that Mr Swinney and his colleagues want to see it abolished in 2016 in an independent Scotland. I think my way is better. Better because it will lift the yoke from tenants in London and Manchester and Birmingham and Newcastle, as well as in Scotland. But to be honest, I think those affected are not too worried about who does it. And we can decide today that no household in Scotland need pay the bedroom tax and none should face eviction solely because of it, and we should. To do that, we must, in the words of the Prophet, act justly, love kindness and walk humbly, and support the amendment. Act justly because most of the victims of the bedroom tax cannot choose to move to a smaller house because there are no such houses available to them. Justly, because with full funding, there is no need to choose who to help and who not to help. Justly, because this protection from eviction will extend to all tenants and not just tenants of councils with no eviction policies. And as for kindness, to support this amendment is to explicitly reject the cruelty of an all-too-common rhetoric which suggests that those affected by welfare reforms are feckless benefit scrougers living in palatial accommodation. The truth is most families affected by bedroom tax are working, 80% have a family member with a disability, and the spare rooms are needed for carers, medical equipment or children spending time with an estranged parent. But I also acknowledge that both we and the government will have to walk humbly today. They will have to set aside the constitutional argument and accept that getting tenants off the hook is more important than leaving Whitehall on it. While we must acknowledge that in this at least the government has not left Scotland on pause, but has acted and done the right thing. Now, even greater humility will be required if the Tories or Liberal Democrats are to support our amendment tonight, given that it is only needed because of the wrong-headed policy of their Westminster colleagues. But I hope that they will consider it. Presiding Officer, yesterday was a good day for this Parliament. In the passing of the Equal Marriage Act, we rose to the singular historic moment. We were the Parliament we were meant to be, shaping a more modern, inclusive Scotland. Today, we can rise above party difference again and do the right thing again, this time in response not to the historical moment, but to the daily, relentless, unfair difficulties and challenges of life faced by far too many of our fellow citizens. We can be the Parliament we were set up to be again today, exercising our power to protect our people. To paraphrase the nearest thing this place has to a prophet of his own, although I can hear him snorting with derision at the description, to paraphrase Donald Dewar, we can carry ourselves well again today. When this budget was introduced, I called it a don't rock the boat, do nothing, get through the referendum budget. If we pass my amendment today, we will have turned it instead into a sink-the-bedroom tax boat to the bottom of the sea budget. And that is something worth doing. I move.
Thank you. And now calling Gavin Brown. 6 minutes, please, Mr Brown.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. When the draft budget was published in September, the media the next day described it as a tax blow for Scots business, a budget of bribes to break up the UK, and Swinney's independence budget fails to impress.
Mr Brown, could you turn your microphone round slightly? I'm not sure if it's the chat in the chamber, but I think we're not hearing you properly. Thank you.
It should have been a budget, Deputy Presiding Officer, about jobs and about the economy. But today the economy barely got a mention in the Cabinet Secretary's 14-minute speech. It should have been about individual measures that might not win votes in the short term, but that will help the country in the medium term and the long term. Individual measures that might help continue the growth and put it onto a more sustainable footing. Because while the data is good at the moment, the underlying data is clear. We need business investment in order to maintain the positive news. So the primary focus should have been about the economy, but instead it was as described yesterday in the Scottish Government's press release. Parliament urged to send budget message. DWP must accept benefit cap. Now, Deputy Presiding Officer, we hear. The only time they actually asked for that cap to be lifted, though, as we heard from the Cabinet Secretary today, was at the tail end. She says it's nonsense. He said in the chamber the only time they actually asked was at the tail end of last week.
Order.
The only time
Order, Mr Brown. Can members please desist from shouting out across the chamber? Thank you, Mr Brown.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The only time was at the end of last week, despite, though, the fact that 2 days prior to that, the Housing and Welfare Minister of the Scottish Government had actually held a meeting with Lord Freud in order to discuss welfare reform. But 2 days earlier, that issue that is so critical, according to the Scottish Government's narrative today, wasn't even worth a mention in that meeting. And they need a letter with days to go in order to try and put their point across. Deputy Presiding Officer, this government has claimed for months that they have been unable to act, clinging desperately to Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act as if they are powerless to do any more than they say they want to do. We heard just a week ago at Stage 2 of the Budget Bill, the Cabinet Secretary said in evidence to the Finance Committee the sum of £20 million is a product of what I and the Government believe is the only legal route that we have to act in this area of policy. 7 days later, it's not going to be easy, was what he said. It was the only legal route a week ago, but today it's not going to be easy. Happy to give way.
Cabinet Secretary.
The point that I was making to the Finance Committee is that the only legal route for us to get money into the hands of tenants without breaching the Social Security reservation is to use the discretionary housing payment route. That is absolutely consistent through everything the Government has said, and it cannot be disputed by Mr Brown today.
Gavin Brown.
Deputy Presiding Officer, we heard earlier that Renfrewshire Council has decided to take measures. We heard during the course of the week that East Lothian Council have decided to take measures. We heard loud and clear yesterday in front of the Scottish Affairs Committee at the House of Commons that the Scottish Government does currently have the powers to do what it says it wants to do. Whether it wanted to deploy them quickly or more slowly, as we appear to be seeing, is a matter for them. Did they actually look into redesignation at all as a Scottish Government? Did they actually look at giving funds to housing associations and social landlords at all? Did they actually investigate or look into any alternatives at all over the course of the last 12 months? It would appear, Deputy Presiding Officer, that the councils were able to engage with the UK Government and be innovative, but the Scottish Government was not. I'm happy to give way to Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Would it not be better for Mr Brown not to lecture us on this subject and just do the decent thing and abolish the bedroom tax now?
Gavin Brown.
That got a reaction. I feel a bit like Pete Wishart at Strathallan School, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let's be clear, Deputy Presiding Officer. That was not a lecture at all. That was a series of important questions that I think the Scottish Government needs to answer. Questions that they could have asked at the very beginning of the process, but only appear to be asking now. I'll give way to Ian Gray.
Ian Gray.
In part, I agree with Mr Brown. I think that, for example, the Deputy First Minister could have written to the DWP much earlier to ask for the cap to be lifted. The point is she's done that now. The point is that an alternative scheme is being agreed between ourselves and the SNP now. Should he not, since we've reached that stage, simply support the amendment and let us progress?
Gavin Brown, although we're short of time, I'll give you a little bit extra for all of the interruptions.
I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think our party's position has been clear all along, absolutely consistent all the way down the line. We believe that where funds are available, we think it should be invested into the economy. We think we should be putting any consequentials that we have into getting growth going in Scotland, going to getting employment measures that are going to be sustainable in the long term. So no, we don't support Mr Gray's amendment at all, but we do point out that some of the hot air coming from the government, particularly over the course of the last week, is merely hot air. They have changed their position fairly dramatically over the course of the last 7 days, and I just wonder whether it was about competence or whether this was an intentional ploy to try and get maximum political mileage. Because, as the Cabinet Secretary said on the very day that the budget document was released, there is no provision in the budget for dealing with the bedroom tax, and that's because I have absolutely no intention of letting the Westminster Government off the hook in 2014-15. This was about trying to extract political mileage, Deputy Presiding Officer, as opposed to doing what they said they wanted to do, and what it turns out they actually had the powers to do all along. That's why we will not be backing this budget.
Thank you very much. We're very tight for time this afternoon. Speeches of a maximum of 6 minutes, and if members do wish to participate, can I suggest that they might want to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At stage 1, I supported a budget I believed would protect and grow Scotland's economy, maintain the social contract with Scotland's people, and offer support and assistance to those in our society who are most in need where it can be offered. My view has not changed. However, I believe there are significant additions to the draft budget which should be welcomed across the Chamber. I was particularly pleased by the recent announcement that an additional £13 million will be levered into the college sector, creating 3,500 new full-time places. In my own area, this will see Ayrshire College secure more than £1.1 million in funding.
Mr Gibson, I'm sorry, could I stop you for a moment? Members are saying they can't hear you. I have asked to have the microphones checked this afternoon because they do seem quite low. So just to make sure it is directionally pointed at you. Thank you.
Apologies, Presiding Officer. I'm not in the mood to use my usual bombastic method of delivery. I'm trying to be somewhat more restrained this afternoon, and perhaps people can't hear me as well as they normally can. I've also got a very sore throat, so apologies to everyone in the Chamber. In my own area, this will see Ayrshire College secure more than £1.1 million in funding, which will be used to support 300 additional college places and enhance employability activities. This will provide opportunities to work with employers, invest in delivering skills to Ayrshire College graduates, increase employment opportunities in key growth sectors of the Scottish economy, such as renewable energy, engineering, creative industries and food and drink. It will also help build on Scotland's relatively strong employment figures and in particular drive youth employment. Although unable to touch on the issue in the previous debate, I was also pleased to note the £77 million of additional business rates relief in order to maintain parity with rates in England and Wales and expand the small business bonus scheme. Given that SMEs account for 99% of all Scottish businesses and over half of all private sector employment, it is clear we must continue this vital business support during tough economic times. Indeed, the Federation of Small Businesses warmly welcomed this announcement, stating that the scheme had injected Scottish smaller enterprises with working capital at a time when they needed it most, and that the Scottish Government has put these firms on a level playing field with their English and Welsh counterparts. The Scottish Government is also investing in our young people with an additional £125 million over 3 years to support young people towards and into work, including cash for recruitment incentives to help small companies recruit young people by paying half the wage for the first 6 months of a new job. The £30 million Opportunities for All funding supports our commitment that all 16 to 19-year-olds in Scotland already in work, education or training will be offered a learning or training opportunity. And £5 million supports up to 2,500 young people into opportunities linked to major cultural and sporting events, along with a record number of apprenticeships. Supporting public services in challenging financial times is vital, and this budget will protect the NHS budget, maintain the council tax reduction scheme, maintain a Scottish living wage per public sector workers for which the Scottish Government is responsible, continue support for the 3 change funds, driving a shift to more preventive approaches, and provide £120 million funding in 2015-16 to assist health and social care integration. The Scottish Government is also on track to deliver 30,000 affordable homes by 2016, and 20,000 of these will be for social rent. Over the 4 years to 2015-16, the Scottish Government will have driven investment in affordable housing to more than £1.35 billion. The SNP supports free prescriptions, free tuition, concessionary travel and free personal care, and remember that the council tax freeze across Scotland continues to put money into people's pockets. In terms of infrastructure, £8 billion of investment will take place in Scotland over the next 2 years. Last month saw a degree of consensus break out between the 2 largest parties in this chamber, and whilst the debate was at times heated and plenty of differences remain, it was refreshing to see the Labour Party and Scottish Government working together to reach what seems to be a point of agreement regarding at least one aspect of welfare reforms being imposed on Scotland by the Tory Liberal coalition at Westminster. The bedroom tax represents all that is wrong with the welfare reforms haphazardly enforced by the coalition, idealistically driven with little or no thought for the people affected. Westminster's solution, that people should somehow just find smaller accommodation, is entirely compassionless, capricious and impractical. There can be no doubt that the bedroom tax is one of the most unpopular, iniquitous and idiotic policy decisions taken by a UK government since the poll tax. As it stands, some 76,000 Scots, including over 12,000 children, suffer as a result of this bedroom tax, and 80% of households affected contain at least one disabled adult. It is also clear that Scotland has been disproportionately hit by this policy, with recent freedom of information requests by the TUC's False Economy campaign showing Scottish councils as some of the highest proportions of tenants, for example. I'll take a brief intervention.
Neil Findlay.
While he's on the bedroom tax, I wonder if he would take an opportunity to commend the innovative use of the Members' Bill process by Jackie Baillie that really forced this up the agenda.
Kenneth Gibson.
I think most importantly I'd like to commend the Scottish Government for actually working with other parties in terms of trying to find a proper solution to this. Labour support today will send a strong, united message to Westminster that this Parliament and the people of Scotland do not accept the bedroom tax. As the Daily Record editorial pointed out yesterday, the Minister for Welfare Reform could have lifted the discretionary housing payment cap with a stroke of a pen. That would have been the easy solution and brought immediate relief to the thousands of Scots plunged into poverty. This Parliament has had to pick up the pieces and find money from our own devolved budget to cover the costs of a reserved matter. It demonstrates again how out of touch Westminster is, and surely adds weight to the argument that these matters are best placed and would be better managed in the hands of a Scottish Parliament working with the interests of the Scottish people at heart. Presiding Officer, this budget gives us the opportunity to vote to stimulate growth in our economy, create and protect jobs, deliver P1 to P3 free school meals and expand childcare, offer opportunities to our young people and help those who need it most. We have control over the economy, we can do things better and more effectively for Scotland. Whilst Westminster's failed austerity agenda is holding Scotland back, with independence we can bring about lasting growth and make Scotland fairer. Support the budget.
Thank you. I now call Jackie Baillie to be followed by Christina McKelvey, and I reiterate speeches of a maximum of 6 minutes.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate and, unsurprisingly, want to focus my remarks solely on the bedroom tax. Can I say at the outset how much I welcome the position now taken by the Scottish Government on the bedroom tax, and in particular single out John Swinney for praise. His approach to the negotiations has been positive, and I very much welcome our discussions, and I look forward to continuing to work with him in the future, and would welcome confirmation from him that I will be involved in the discussions on shaping the mechanism that will be used as we previously discussed. But let's be clear. By voting for this budget today, we will effectively bring an end to the bedroom tax in Scotland. I can find very few people who believe that the bedroom tax is anything other than a vile and iniquitous piece of legislation, affecting almost 80,000 people in Scotland, at least 80% of whom are disabled, and the majority on low and fixed incomes.
Ms Bailey, if members don't wish to listen to the debate, then they are free to leave the chamber. But if members are in the chamber, could they please cease their conversations and listen to the debate? Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think we would all agree that the policy itself is completely wrong-headed. You don't use a blunt policy instrument like the bedroom tax, charging people for simply having a spare room, to fix a problem that is housing supply. Indeed, it's estimated that some 60,000 people would need to move house to avoid the bedroom tax, but only something like 20,000 one-bedroom properties were available for let last year. So it just doesn't add up, and it demonstrates that the policy, I think, had more to do with Tory ideology than any evidence base. Labour has been very clear throughout the debate. We oppose the bedroom tax. We voted against it, and we would abolish it if elected in 2015. I acknowledge that the SNP have also committed to abolition in the event of independence. But in both these cases, we're asking people to wait, to cope with having to pay for their housing whilst they are on fixed and low incomes, and deal with the stress that this causes. John Swinney said in a previous debate that he didn't want to let Westminster off the hook. But I'm sure he would also agree that we shouldn't have some of our poorest people left on the hook to prove a political point. This is so much more important than a debate about the Constitution. This is about the Parliament using the powers to protect people. It is exactly at times like these that the Parliament should fulfil this purpose. The 80,000 tenants in Scotland hit by the bedroom tax can't afford to wait until the votes are counted in the referendum or the general election, for that matter. We can and should act now. In January this year, I gained sufficient support to introduce a bill to protect people from evictions as a result of the bedroom tax. The SNP, with one brave exception, didn't rush to sign it, but it certainly served its purpose by concentrating the minds of ministers. My only disappointment is that it's taken so long to do so, because for more than a year, Labour has been calling for the Scottish Government to fully mitigate the bedroom tax. We stood shoulder to shoulder with campaigners across Scotland. We have marched together across cities in Scotland, and our activists have taken to the streets with petitions taking the campaign to local neighbourhoods. In March 2013, Govan Law Centre lodged a petition in this Parliament calling for no evictions as a result of the bedroom tax arrears. It would be fair to say that it was not met with universal acclaim from the SNP. Indeed, SNP backbenchers were lined up to condemn it. In October 2013, the No to Bedroom Tax campaign lodged a petition calling for the £50 million to mitigate the bedroom tax in Scotland. Again, this was not met by universal acclaim from the SNP, and again, SNP backbenchers were lined up to condemn it. It is not a matter of cost. £50 million is a tiny drop in the ocean of the Scottish Government's budget. And under pressure from Labour and Civic Scotland, John Swinney added a very welcome £20 million to discretionary housing payments, claiming that this was all he had the power to do. But we now know that that isn't the case. We provided clear evidence of two successful schemes that are currently operating in Scotland. First, we had Renfrewshire Council's Tenant Assistance Fund, helpfully considered positively by Audit Scotland. And there was a similar fund operating in East Lothian Housing Association. Both, Presiding Officer, are perfectly legal. You can use existing housing legislation to deliver. There are other routes too that the Scottish Government can take that are within their powers. That was confirmed by Danny Alexander and David Mundell, both UK Government ministers. The money pledged by the Finance Minister today to end the bedroom tax in Scotland is absolutely and unreservedly welcome. This removes the need for any social landlord to take eviction proceedings against tenants due to arrears of bedroom tax. And let me just say, despite the 11th hour letter to Lord Freud asking for the cap to be lifted, John Swinney has recognised that there is action he can take, and I very much welcome that. Let me borrow a phrase, Presiding Officer, from the First Minister, not somebody I often quote. But he's fond of saying, "Let me say as gently as I can." Usually it's to Jackie Bailey, but on this occasion, let me say as gently as I can to Nicola Sturgeon. The letter could have been written at any point in the past year, but it wasn't. Margaret Burgess could have raised it with Lord Freud when she met him the other week, but she didn't.
You must draw to
This was a straw man, a fig leaf designed to give some cover to a spectacular U-turn by the SNP. The people of Scotland do expect us to work together in the interests of them, rather than engaging in political posturing with the UK Government. Finally, Presiding Officer, I very much welcome this U-turn by the SNP. It is a strength of government, not a weakness, to listen and then to act and to admit when you are wrong. Presiding Officer, today we can vote to effectively end the bedroom tax in Scotland, and it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Before I call Christina McKelvey to be followed by James Kelly, I advise the Chamber once more speeches of a maximum of 6 minutes. If members go over, both previous members went over their time. If members go over their time in future, then they will either have to be stopped or members will have to drop out of the debate. Christina McKelvey, to be followed by James Kelly.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I hold very strongly to what seems to have become a rather unpopular concept, that every individual of any age, ethnic or religious background, sexuality or gender is entitled to be treated fairly and equally. Rabbi Bunz espoused the idea profoundly that a man to man the world o'er, and I'll add my other wee bit in here, shall brothers and sisters be for all that. So although it has become unfashionable in Westminster for fairness and equality remain deeply embedded in the Scottish psyche. The failed austerity agenda is holding Scotland back. This budget is proof that decisions about Scotland are best taken by the people who live here. Our commitment to deliver free school meals for all children in primaries 1 to 3 and our transformational childcare policy show where this Scottish Government's priorities actually are. Our priorities are not those of the Westminster Tories. So what has gone wrong, I ask you? Well, is it the children of Scotland whom we are pulling out of poverty are being condemned again to it? Why is this Scottish Government, committed as it is to providing universal benefits and a decent living wage, being forced to follow an alien inequality agenda?
Order, please. Christina McKelvey.
This Parliament's Welfare Reform Committee recently received an independent study undertaken by the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research at Sheffield Hallam University. Its findings warned that the welfare reforms alone will take more than £1.6 billion a year out of the Scottish economy. That equates to around £480 a year for every adult of working age in Scotland. In Glasgow, that amount rises to £650 a year. Down south, in Tory constituencies like Hampshire and Berkshire, the impact falls to about £200 a year. Now, that might be good for David Cameron's voters, but it doesn't follow my idea of fairness, and it certainly doesn't follow this Scottish Government's idea of equality. The gap between the rich and the poor is increasing on a UK-wide basis. Only with independence can we really set about changing that in Scotland. As is inevitably the case under the Coalition Government's misnamed welfare reforms, it is the most vulnerable who suffer. That means especially the women and the children, older people and those with any type of disability. People are considered to be living in poverty if they live in households of less than 60% of median household income. This is the key measure used by both the UK and Scottish Governments and by the EU. Using this measure, and after housing costs are taken into account, the Child Poverty Action Group in Scotland found in 2012 that 910,000 people still live in poverty. That is 18% of our population, 220,000 Scottish children. 21% of all of our children in Scotland live in poverty. And real progress was being made on those figures until the UK Coalition Government's tax and benefits policies started coming into the picture. But now warns the CPAG that there will be a massive rise in child poverty in the coming years. In Scotland alone, forecast trends would suggest between 50 and 100,000 more children being pushed into poverty by 2020. Now, in countries like Denmark and Norway, less than 10% of their children live in poverty, and while that figure is still alarming, it is much, much less than the current UK figures. And this Scottish Government is determined to change that, but without the powers to make our own welfare policies, we can only try to mitigate the disasters of the bedroom tax and the cuts to child benefits. The virtual elimination of disability living allowance and the introduction of so-called personal independence allowance are going to make the poverty picture far grimmer for those over the next months. Far grimmer from a friend of mine who suffers from motor neuron disease, who has been told by ATOS he's fit for work. That's grim. And of course, poverty impacts on health and mental well-being. It pushes people out of the workforce and stops them from becoming economically active. This has to have a negative impact on the more general condition of the Scottish economy. People with no money can't spend it. They can't contribute to the growth of the nation. Contrary to George Osborne's School of Economic Theory, government commitments and policy action that boost pensions, benefits, tax credits and wages are removed some of the barriers to work have had a positive impact in Scotland. Cutting back on benefits will not contribute to a healthier economic environment. Mr Osborne's approach is indeed a false economy, in my opinion. This Government's commitment to a living wage, to free school meals for up to primary threes, the energy assistance package, improved access to debt solutions and investment in new council housing are all important moves forward.
Final minute.
We can't move them totally forward without independence. But progress in child poverty is stalling, not because of this Scottish Government's policies, but because of the welfare policies inflicted upon us by Westminster. Not only do we all stand to lose the gains made so far, but to actually reverse the progress made. That's a travesty. Westminster political campaigners have brought a revival of moral scapegoating, painting sizeable elements of Scottish society as broken. The language of worthlessness has become commonplace, bundling together a range of reasons why people are not in paid work, including disability, ill health and caring responsibilities. This oversimplification has led to increasing punitive welfare policies and an increase to the risk of people falling into poverty. Presiding Officer, we are not and will not be that broken society of the Tory mindset. We will preserve and protect our fundamental values of care, compassion, equality and fairness, and we will do it in an independent Scotland, a Scotland of the common weal where all of us are first.
Thank you. And I call James Kelly to be followed by George Adam.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to take part in this afternoon's budget debate. Understandably, quite a lot of the discussion in the initial exchanges centred on the bedroom tax. If Parliament and being in politics is about making a difference, then the agreement that has been reached between the Scottish Government and the Labour Party on this issue is a crucial one. Because there's no doubt, as members have spoken about, that the bedroom tax, a measure which so unfairly affects nearly 80,000 people in Scotland, is something that we should come together and we should act on. I welcome the fact that the Government have engaged positively on the issue, and we have moved significantly since the draft budget was published in September, and there was no money available to mitigate the efforts of the bedroom tax. The Government has listened to the strong voices not only of Ian Gray and Jackie Baillie, but also organisations like Shelter Scotland. And that's important because they are speaking from the ground, they're speaking from communities, and it's important that as a Parliament we take those views on board. I think it also is important to recognise that despite the agreement on the bedroom tax issue, the reality is that the passing of this budget will not wipe out some of the issues that we see on the ground in our constituencies. You know, for me, I know that there are schools in my constituency where they can't afford to print out the homework for the school pupils. I recently visited a sheltered housing complex where they were no longer going to be able to continue with the overnight sleeper, causing a lot of anxiety to pensioners in that complex. And I frequently get visited by constituents staying in overcrowded accommodation and struggling to get alternative housing because of the growing waiting lists. So it's important not to lose track of the issues that we see on the ground. With the £30 billion that the Government has at its disposal, in the Scottish Budget, there's no doubt that they can make an impact on the economy. And one of the ways that that can be done is through investment in capital projects. But I think it is important that those projects are properly managed and the investment is brought forward to make a difference in the economy. We recently saw an announcement on the M8, M73, M74 interchange project. And although it's welcome that we're seeing some progress on that project, the delays have been far too slow in terms of improving transport in that area and making a contribution to the economy in the west of Scotland. Another example of that is the Egypt project, where we had an announcement from the Minister only this week. The reality is that the ground has continued to shift on that project. We saw cuts of £350 million last year, and now we see the cost increase by £93 million. The lack of clarity in terms of, just in a minute, the lack of clarity in terms of the phase 2 of the project and the criticism that the management of that project received from Audit Scotland is no doubt a matter of concern. I give way to John Mason.
John Mason.
I thank the member very much for giving way. I mean, would you agree that the innovative solution of extending the platforms at Queen Street, and so you don't need so many trains, you don't need such fancy signalling, should be better for the environment and is a kind of win all round?
James Kelly.
I think the reality is that the government is yet to flush out all the detail of what is happening at Queen Street and what is happening for the rest of the programme. And we need to, although we all want to see work in these projects, we need to see the detail of that work. And it's important because of the way these projects are managed. Audit Scotland criticised the lack of transparency around the 5 key infrastructure projects. And if you don't manage the projects properly and ensure that the key details are followed through, then we won't see the economic benefits. We're talking about billions of pounds of public money here, and we've got to make the best use of that investment. I think the other point I would make is that it's important that the SNP government treats Parliament properly and with respect. Back in October, the government announced its intention to take Prestwick Airport into public ownership, something that was supported by Labour. And that was followed through by the purchase of the airport in November. But it took until yesterday for us actually to get an update in terms of the business case and the budget implications. £3 million of working capital had to be injected and £2 million to refurbish the airport, and also £1 million to carry through due diligence. That's £6 million in total. But I didn't hear anything in John Swinney's statement in terms of the budgetary implications of that. We shouldn't have had to wait 4 months to hear what is happening with such an important project, which gets implications for the Scottish budget and also for the Scottish economy. And summing up...
You must close.
Yeah, and summing up, I think it's important that the budget is passed today, but it's important that the government also takes a hands-on approach to the issues that are affecting many of our constituencies.
Thank you. George Adams, be followed by Willie Rennie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This budget is proof, if any were needed, that decisions about Scotland are best taken by the people who care most about Scotland, the people who live here and their representatives. Westminster's failed austerity agenda is holding Scotland back, and in my opinion this Parliament needs further powers to bring about the kind of lasting growth and create the future that we all want in Scotland. To take that next step, the next leap, this Parliament needs to gain further powers. As the Cabinet Secretary has already stated, this budget will support economic recovery, creating jobs and opportunities for the people of Scotland. There's been a lot of talk about the bedroom tax, but I would like to talk about some of the things to do with education at this stage. The budget can... Yes, no problem, Mr Henry.
Differences in the constitutional future. Will you join with me today to praise the work of Renfrewshire Council and its innovative approach to helping tenants through its hardship fund?
George Adam.
What I will do, Mr Henry, is I will actually praise the work of this Parliament and the people, the parties working together, representing the people of Scotland to find a solution to the bedroom tax at this stage. And I would say, to go back on, Presiding Officer, to the issues that I was going to discuss, the very important fact that the Government will deliver primary free school meals to Primary 1 and Primary 3 and expand childcare. You know, £55 million over 2 years to expand the provision of free school meals. £59 million over a 2-year to provide additional childcare places, taking the total additional funding for childcare to around £250 million over a 2-year period. From August 2014, all 2-year-olds in workless households will be entitled to 600 hours of free nursery education. This will benefit 8,400 children, 15% of all 2-year-olds. From August 2015, this will be extended to 2-year-olds from the hardest-pressed families in receipt of a range of benefits. This will benefit 15,400 children, 27% of all 2-year-olds. This is about making a difference in people's lives, and this budget is showing that the Scottish Government is achieving that. From 2015, in January, all children from P1 to P3 will be entitled to free school meals, saving families at least £330 per child per year. This commitment means that from August 2015, Scotland will be delivering more than 80 million hours of free care to 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds every single year. That's 6.5% more hours than if we had implemented the English system. But to get to the next level, to make that leap, to move Scotland forward, we can only transform childcare with independence. An SNP government and an independent Scotland will introduce a universal system of high-quality learning and childcare for children from age of 1. The Scotland's Future document sets out how we can transform childcare. Incidentally, that's on page 194, Presiding Officer. By the end of our budget, we will provide 600 hours of childcare to around half of Scotland's 2-year-olds. Those whose parents receive working tax credits or child tax credits will benefit. By the end of the first Parliament, we will ensure that all 3- and 4-year-olds and vulnerable 2-year-olds will be entitled to 1,140 hours of childcare, the same number of hours children currently spend at primary school. By the end of the second Parliament, we can ensure that all children from the age of 1 to school age will be entitled to the same hours of childcare per year. Earlier I mentioned this budget support economic recovery, creating jobs and opportunity for people of Scotland. The Scottish Government are already investing in our young people. Scotland is the only country in the EU to have a dedicated Minister for Youth Employment. Since December 2011, Angela Constance, the Minister for Youth Employment Minister, has been in charge of this portfolio, and the youth employment rate has fallen from around 25.4%, that's 113,000 young people, to 79,000 young people, 19.6% compared to 20.4% in the UK. The Scottish Government has invested an additional £125 million from 2012 to 2014-15 to support young people towards and into work. £88 million, including £25 million cash for recruitment incentives to help small companies recruit young people by paying half the wage for the first 6 months of a new job. £30 million opportunities for all funding to support commitment to all 16- and 19-year-olds in Scotland not already in work. Education or training will be offered a learning or training opportunity. £5 million to support up to 2,500 young people into opportunities linked in major cultural and sporting events. I welcome all these commitments from the Scottish Government and the Cabinet Secretary, but we have to look at other ways to make sure that we can take Scotland to that next step, to make that difference, because I don't doubt for a minute, Presiding Officer, that every one of us in here has the best interests of our constituents and the people of Scotland at heart. But in our own way, we have to look at how we would actually deal with the challenges that we have currently in front of us. I personally believe that independence offers us the future for our children, our young people, and that to me is the most important thing, and the reason my motivation as a parent and also as an elected representative to represent the people in my constituency. So, closing, Presiding Officer, I would just like to say I welcome this budget, which focuses on and helps towards Scotland's future, but I also look forward to future budgets when we sit here and talk about Scotland's future in an independent Parliament.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, can I remind members to speak through the chair and also remind them that they should not turn their backs on the presiding officer. I call Willie Rennie to be followed by Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This is a good day. This is a good day for young children. It was a chance to change, I think, their fortunes so they can reach their potential. And it's going to be a partnership between parents and this Parliament. So I thank John Swinney for the work that he has done together with me in achieving what I think is a really good day, because I think we underestimate the ability of and the potential of young children. We should remember what the nursery education provision will do. There's three primary reasons why we want to increase nursery education for 2-year-olds. First, it supplements the excellent work that's undertaken by parents, and we should not underestimate the role of parents in this. We should not undervalue what they contribute to their child's upbringing. But secondly, this is also about a route out of poverty. I believe as a Liberal that education is the route out of poverty. It's the way to tackle the inequality that we see every day in our communities, but we're desperate to change. But this gives children the crucial extra support that they need. Now, James Heckman, who I've mentioned before to John Swinney, said the best investment that you can make in education is before the age of 3. The former Chief Medical Officer talks about brain development. So the early stages, the relationships between a child, their family and their community is crucial at those early stages. So making that investment is absolutely essential. But finally, and I think it is the last reason why we should do this, it gives parents the opportunity to get back to work. It gives them, it's only a small number of hours every week, but that extra step back into the workplace is something that will boost their income and their employment, which ultimately work is good and we should be encouraging that. So 3 excellent reasons why we should support this. I have to say I'm slightly disappointed it's taken so long to get there. I hope we don't have so many barriers put up next time round. First we were told it wouldn't work in England, then we were said we had family nurse partnerships, so we didn't need it because that was the equivalent. Then we were told we could only do it through independence, and then there was no money. Each barrier we've managed to knock down, and I thank John Swinney for overcoming each of those barriers to make this decision today. But I have to say, if it was not for the persistence of some in this chamber, Malcolm Chisholm, Bob Doris, who's obviously too embarrassed to be here today to have more praise heaped on him by myself, but people who are persistent on this policy, before it was the popular thing to do, I commend the work that they have undertaken. I wrote to John Swinney before Christmas with 5 requests for this budget, 5 recommendations, reasonable recommendations, costed proposals, as I've done on every single budget process since I've been in this Parliament. The first was on nursery education, and I'm delighted we've made progress on that. The second was on free school meals, announced by Nick Clegg in Glasgow last autumn, now being delivered throughout the United Kingdom. On social housing, we suggested an innovative way of using the financial transactions money, and I'm hoping to have further discussions with John Swinney as we progress on that. College funding. Colleges have been hit quite significantly with the reductions in spending. The extra £3.5 million for nursery education support, staff support and development is something that's very welcome too. And then the housing debt for Shetland, the unique circumstances that Shetland find themselves in. Again, good constructive discussions with John Swinney on that. So all 5 areas I've seen significant progress and a constructive engagement with John Swinney, and that leads this group to believe that we can support the budget tonight at 5 o'clock, because we've made significant progress. It's not a budget that would be delivered if we miraculously changed from a group of 5 to a majority group in this Parliament, but it would be a budget that is good enough for us to support. We would make, as John Swinney knows, quite radical changes to Scottish Water to release the funds from there to invest in regional development banks, broadband, energy conservation, science and infrastructure. We think that would give a big investment into the economy, creating 100,000 jobs. But nevertheless, we recognise the position we're in, and we recognise the engagement by John Swinney and the improvements we've made on all the 5 areas that we requested. And I'm also pleased that John Swinney has invited me to be part of the implementation of the nursery education rollout for 2-year-olds. I will work constructively with Aileen Campbell and her officials to make sure we are implementing this effectively.
Final minute.
This is a budget, I think, that is good enough. And it's good enough because John Swinney engages in the process. But I think it's also worth marking at this stage the progress, as John Swinney has at the beginning, on the economy. Growth is up, unemployment is down, employment is up, 130,000 extra jobs in Scotland, 1.4 million across the UK. Many in this chamber said that the plan delivered by the UK coalition would not work, but now are very keen to say it was their plan all along. But much more needs to be done, because we cannot be complacent. We need to continue to make progress, to continue to recruit more people in our companies in Scotland. But today's budget is a step in the right direction, with nursery education, school meals, social housing, college funding and housing debt for Shetland. I think it's a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Murdo Fraser.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And, just last week, the Welfare Reform Committee, of which I am the Deputy Convener, published its interim report on the bedroom tax. And the committee found that the bedroom tax is iniquitous and inhumane and may well breach tenants' human rights. It's having a real and harmful impact on people's lives, and often the most vulnerable in society, those with disabilities, children, separated families and so on. And many people are trapped into paying the bedroom tax and there are not enough one-bedroom properties available to downsize to. And felt the solution was, of course, the bedroom tax should, of course, be abolished immediately by the United Kingdom Government. But if it did not, that this Parliament should be given the powers and resources to abolish it, a position supported by all members of the committee except for Alec Johnson. That is the position I believe in. It would allow us to get rid of the iniquitous bedroom tax. But of course, short of that, I do believe it is incumbent on all of us to do what we can to help those on the sharp end of the bedroom tax. And of course, the Scottish Government fully topped up discretionary housing payments to the full level, and the last year it's committed to doing so for the coming year. And the Finance Committee and the Welfare Reform Committee in their budget scrutiny welcomed this funding, which has also been welcomed by others outside of this place, such as Indeed.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I should perhaps state my position as a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Housing and a former Housing Association Director. But apropos of what Jamie Hepburn has been talking about discussions we've been having, I wonder if he shares my concerns that if the DWP don't actually agree to respect any decision this Parliament makes in terms of discretionary housing payments, and then we move to debt write-off, I have a real concern about the legalities of that in terms of the Constitution, the rules and governance of housing associations, not the larger ones that Jackie Bailey spoke about, but small community-based ones.
Can I hurry along, please?
Yes, in many cases are run by voluntary committee members. Would you agree with me that we really need clarification on the legalities of that, both from Jenny Mara and her summing up, and of course from our own Cabinet Secretary when he sums up?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that is one area of concern. Of course, this whole area runs into issues in terms of the limitations of the Scottish Government, of this Parliament, to act more generally. And of course, there are issues for housing associations as well. And I want to talk about the mechanism that's been identified, because I do welcome the £15 million that's been identified to mitigate bedroom tax, further on top of the money that had previously been announced. And I do think it's right to direct this to discretionary housing payments, because, as I said, how we direct resources to mitigate the bedroom tax comes up against the limitations of the powers of this Parliament, the reservations of the Scotland Act in relation to social security payments. I think DHPs are the clear, obvious way to direct additional resources for this effort. And it's, of course, the way to get money into the pockets of those people who need it. I think it's preferable to do that rather than writing off debt, because that means people have had to get into debt in the first place. And we've also seen great demand on DHPs in many parts of Scotland, and North Lanarkshire, where my constituency and indeed your constituency, Presiding Officer, is located. DHPs awarded in April to November last year increased by 881.52% from the equivalent period in the previous year, which is a quite staggering increase indeed. So I think it's right then that we direct additional resources to discretionary housing payments. That, of course, runs up another limitation that we have. Local authorities can only top up DWP funding they've received by 2.5 times. That, of course, that cap comes from a statutory instrument made under Section 70 of the Child Support Pensions and Social Security Act 2000. So we now need the DWP to agree to lift that cap. I believe actually they should have committed more to DHPs in the first place. We know that despite having 20,000 more households in Scotland affected by the bedroom tax in London, the DHP allocation for this coming year is £35 million less than London from the DWP. But the Scottish Government has identified additional funding. The UK ministers have, and this was referred to obliquely by Mr Brown, they have said the Scottish Government can spend its resources as it sees fit. Well, this is how the Scottish Government has identified as the best way, and of course it won't cost the UK Government an additional brass farthing. So any opposition, I believe, could only be born of spite. And I think it's important that when we come to vote on this budget this evening, that this Parliament should send a clear and unambiguous message to Ian Duncan-Smith, who continues, Presiding Officer, to be too afraid to appear in public session at our Parliament's Welfare Reform Committee, that we support the method identified by the Scottish Government to further mitigate against his bedroom tax. Of course, though, Presiding Officer, Scotland suffers in other ways through the welfare reform process, other than the bedroom tax, as was referred to by the Cabinet Secretary. Some £4.5 billion is being removed over a 5-year period. Thereafter, there will be some £2 billion removed per annum once welfare reform is fully in place. That's why I welcome the range of measures that the Scottish Government has taken. There's been some £244 million committed over a 3-year period, and now this £15 million additional by the Scottish Government. I think that's a fantastic commitment by a devolved administration to do what it can to mitigate against the effects of an iniquitous welfare reform process. That's why I've supported previous Scottish Government budgets. That's why I'll support this Scottish Government budget. But I do look forward to the day when we see Scottish Government budgets that aren't just mitigating against the process of welfare reform, but are putting in place a decent and fair social security system for people here in Scotland.
Thank you. Now call Murdo Fraser, to be followed by Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Throughout the budget process, the Scottish Conservatives have been very clear that our priority is the Scottish economy. We from the outset said that we would test the Scottish Government's budget on whether it prioritised economic recovery. It is to my regret that it has not done so. As Willie Rennie said, there is good news about economic recovery. Growth is up and unemployment is down. Just 2 weeks ago, the IMF raised the forecast for UK growth for 2014 from 1.9 to 2.4%. Other estimates suggest the UK economy in the coming years will be the fastest growing in the developed world. But the recovery is still fragile, and government needs to put in all the support it can. Scottish businesses have benefited from a competitive advantage in recent years. This is partly the responsibility of the small business bonus, which the Scottish Conservatives supported. But other steps taken by the SNP have not been so helpful. The retail levy was bad news for business and deterred investment and may well have cost jobs. It is good news that Mr Swinney has indicated he will be scrapping it, but a pity he could not have acted sooner. And he has missed the opportunity to introduce the same retail bonus coming in south of the border. These are measures he could have chosen to help prioritise economic recovery. Instead, the SNP made another choice, not to boost the economy, but to put the money into welfare. They are putting more money into local councils' discretionary housing budgets, despite the fact that across Scotland councils are already unable to spend the very large sums they have been given. To give one example, in my own home local authority and Mr Swinney's in Perth and Kinross, as of January, only 14% of the DHP budget for the current financial year had been spent, of a total of £1.3 million. And it's likely a very substantial sum will have to be returned to the Scottish Government at the end of the financial year. This is a pattern repeated across Scotland, so there is no evidence of a huge level of demand for discretionary payments in relation to the spare room subsidy. I can wait to Mr Gray.
Ian Gray.
I just wonder, in response to that, what action Mr Fraser has taken with the Perth Council to make sure that they're doing everything in their power to ensure that everyone who needs and is entitled to DHP support is receiving it.
Mr Fraser.
The question for Mr Gray, in his new alliance with the Scottish National Party, is why is it a priority to pour money into a budget that is already undersubscribed? Indeed, I would ask, why is this issue a priority at all? Why is putting more money into supporting those who are under-occupying properties deemed by the SNP and indeed the Labour Party to be their top priority in this budget? What about those, for example, who are, as James Kelly fairly asked, in overcrowded accommodation? Why are they not getting the same priority? And my fear is that this budget is more about political opportunism, taking a big stick to beat the UK coalition government, rather than any serious attempt to take practical steps to have a budget in Scotland's best interest. No, I need to make some progress. Now, members across the chamber will object to being accused of opportunism, but I think it's worth considering just for a moment the stance taken in the past by both these parties on this question of an under-occupancy charge. Because it was, of course, the Labour Party in power at Westminster that, as part of the Welfare Reform Act 2007, introduced the local housing allowance, an under-occupancy charge, Deputy Presiding Officer, for those living in private rented accommodation. I need to make some progress. I'll give way later if I have time. Steered through the House of Commons by Jackie Bailey's friend, the then Minister for Employment and Welfare, Mr Jim Murphy. Now, I read Hansard with great interest to see how many times Labour members describe this under-occupancy charge as iniquitous or draconian. But bizarrely, not once did either of these words appear. In fact, the legislation was unanimously supported by the Labour Party, who today seem remarkably incensed when the current coalition government introduces more or less exactly the same measure for those in socially rented housing. No, Presiding Officer, this is more about political point scoring than any stance of principle. And it's not just Labour who are guilty here. Mr McIntosh, I'm about to turn to the SNP. You might enjoy this. Where was the opposition from the SNP members at Westminster? Where were the speeches against the under-occupancy charge? Where was the outrage? Where were the denunciations? There were none. Not a single SNP member in the House of Commons raised so much as a murmur in opposition. And when it came to the vote, not a single SNP member could even be bothered to turn up, never mind vote against. Who were the guilty men, Deputy Presiding Officer? Let me name them. Mike Weir, Stuart Hosey, Angus MacNeill, Angus Robertson, Pete Wishart and, yes, Alex Salmon. So the man who is leader of the SNP and First Minister, the man who regularly denounces the under-occupancy charge as an outrageous measure, did and said nothing when a similar proposal was introduced for the private rented sector.
Last minute, I'm sorry.
No. You can have time to apologise later, Mr Ewing. I'm sure that the Deputy Presiding Officer will make that available to you. So when we hear SNP members denouncing the iniquity of an under-occupancy charge, and we heard plenty of that this afternoon and we'll hear more of it, they should be embarrassed at the behaviour of their SNP colleagues at Westminster, including their own First Minister. Presiding Officer, any reasonable person would conclude that the SNP stance on this is no more than posturing, pure opportunism and rank hypocrisy. It is about scoring political points rather than taking any stance in principle. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, this budget sets the wrong priorities for Scotland. It fails to put the economy first. It is all about politics, and it exposes the double standards at the heart of both the Labour Party and the SNP government. For all these reasons, Parliament should reject it.
Many thanks. Now call on Jim Eadie to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm. Very tight for time. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate, and I welcome the range of measures set out by the Cabinet Secretary this afternoon. The budget has at its heart the ambition to provide the investment Scotland requires to power economic recovery, to create and sustain employment and to support the transition to a low-carbon economy. It puts in place the measures and funds required to protect the most vulnerable people in Scotland from the impact of the UK Government's austerity programme and the dismantling of the welfare state which the UK Government is embarked upon. Now, I agree with Ian Gray when he said that he always had confidence in the Cabinet Secretary. I too have confidence in the Cabinet Secretary, and he is to be commended on delivering a balanced budget in the face of the 11% reduction in the fiscal DEL over a 5-year period, a reduction which has been even greater in terms of capital investment. And it is unfortunate that the Chancellor is determined to pursue his failed austerity agenda at any cost. The UK, for Murdo Fraser to say that the recovery is fragile is an understatement. The UK economy over the period to 2015 is now forecast to be 5.9% smaller, with borrowing £197 billion higher than when the Chancellor first set out his spending plans in 2010. These are not policies that are made in Scotland or that are benefiting the people of Scotland. Now, Jackie Bailey made a characteristically robust and uncompromising contribution on the bedroom tax, but let me say in this new spirit of consensus that on the issue of the bedroom tax I am in complete agreement with her when she says that the inequity of the tax is one that is impacting on 80,000 people across Scotland, 8 in 10 of whom are in receipt of disability benefits, many of whom are on fixed incomes. They are having to pay the price for Westminster's austerity programme. And I think we have to reflect on the fact that the bedroom tax is a policy which has been made in London to address a problem that does not exist out with the City of London. Despite Scotland having 20,000 more households affected by the bedroom tax than London, the WHP Department for Work and Pensions allocation for Scotland in 2014-15 is £35 million less than London. That tells us that the solution is addressing the problem of the overheating in the rental market in London and the south east of England. Now, I welcome the agreement between the Scottish Government and the Labour Party, and I hope that we can apply pressure which will be successful in having the limit on discretionary housing payments lifted, in order that we can address what the Welfare Reform Committee described as the iniquitous and inhumane bedroom tax. But whatever the outcome of the Deputy First Minister's appeal to Lord Freud, the fact remains that we can only mitigate the impact of the bedroom tax. We cannot abolish it without the powers to do so. And the Scottish Government has long argued that Westminster cuts are a roadblock to economic recovery, yet only last month Chancellor George Osborne pledged £12 billion of further cuts to welfare spending after the next general election. And I think that is the real threat that faces the people of Scotland, and one that we have to address in the coming referendum. We have to contrast the opportunity which independence will provide, and which was brought into sharp focus by the analysis published this week by the Financial Times, which said the Scottish economy would rank among the top 50 in the world by size of GDP and would be relatively wealthy, richer than the rest of the UK and in the top 20 countries globally in terms of GDP per head. That is the opportunity which independence provides, and it's the opportunity for us to go beyond the limits of the devolved settlement and of the budget constraints within which Mr Swinney has to operate. But I do commend the Cabinet Secretary for the measures that he has brought forward, the £8 billion infrastructure investment over the next 2 years, and in particular the fact that some of that will go towards the refurbishment of James Gillespie's secondary school in my own constituency. The other measures which I would like to commend the Cabinet Secretary for include the provision of funding, additional £20 million of funding for cycling infrastructure projects across the country, an announcement which has already been welcomed by cycling organisations such as Spokes, Cycling Scotland and Sustrans. This funding will enhance the Community Links programme run by Sustrans Scotland, and it will allow us to factor in even greater additional funding through local authorities. Some of that new funding has already been allocated to improvements in my own constituency, to the refurbishment and resurfacing of North Meadow Walk cycle path, which will be to the benefit of many people in my constituency. Presiding Officer, this budget provides investment to support economic growth, to protect our most vulnerable, to deliver the high-quality public services that people in Scotland have a right to expect, and I commend the Scottish Government for it.
Many thanks, and thanks for your brevity. I now call on Malcolm Chisholm to be followed by John Mason.
Presiding Officer, I'm very pleased to agree with the Cabinet Secretary wherever I can, so I'm sure that all Labour and SNP members, and hopefully some others, will agree with him when he said that the bedroom tax was an, I quote, iniquitous and damaging policy. Unfortunately, of course, Murdo Fraser and his colleagues don't agree with that, and introduced the spurious comparison with the local housing allowance. The fact of the matter is that the bedroom tax penalises people who are already disadvantaged and who are sitting in tenancies from which they cannot move. The reality is the local housing allowance affected no sitting tenant. Now, of course, the SNP and Labour may disagree about how to end the bedroom tax in law, but we have always agreed that it needs to end, and we now agree at the end of the budget process that we must do whatever it takes to hasten its demise in Scotland. Now, I think most people in Scotland will be very pleased to see us working together in this way. I think they would probably like to see it happen more often, and notwithstanding our differences over the next few months, I hope that it may be seen in some other areas. Now, it's true that nothing in the budget, there was nothing originally in the budget about this, and it certainly is the case that it wouldn't have happened without the pressure of campaigners and the demands from Labour. It's also true that there was no approach to the UK government until Friday, and certainly we could make many comments about that, and one that I will make is that I intervened on the Cabinet Secretary on the 19th of December and raised specifically this issue of a letter to the UK government, but no action was taken until Friday, and clearly much more could be said about that. But let's not dwell too much on that today, because what we really ought to concentrate on today and over the next few weeks is ensuring that everyone who needs and is entitled to help to deal with the bedroom tax receives that help. And that is basically what John Swinney, Jackie Baillie and others need to set their minds to over the next few weeks, because everyone who is suffering from this needs to receive the help which has been promised today. Now, as Ian Gray said at the end of his speech, this has therefore become a sink the bedroom tax budget, having started life as a don't rock the boat budget. And I think the fact that it was a don't rock the boat budget is actually evidenced by the lack of alternative elements of the budget being discussed even by the Conservatives today. It was the bedroom tax that took the majority, for example, of the last speech, was one by Murdo Fraser. So the debate has concentrated a great deal on bedroom tax and on childcare. And of course, it's no accident that those were the two big demands that Labour decided we would put forward for the budget this year. Now, there was also, of course, the free school meals argument, but since the SNP have not repeated their inaccurate comments about Labour that they used in previous debates, I won't reopen that subject today, except to repeat briefly the point I made to John Swinney in the Finance Committee last week, that there are problems for quite a few schools in terms of being able to accommodate the increased numbers from the free school meals policy. I can certainly think of at least one school in my constituency, and he did undertake to work with COSLA to try to address that problem. So again, let's concentrate on the practical implementations of the policies that have been agreed in this budget, whether it's on free school meals or on the bedroom tax, or indeed on childcare, which I must come to in the last couple of minutes. I pay tribute, although he's not here at the moment, to Willie Rennie's persistence on this issue, but I'm sure he would recognise, if he was here, that Labour's big ask on childcare in the early stages of the budget process was absolutely crucial to the announcement about childcare for 2-year-olds in January. Clearly, like many other aspects of policies, you cannot absolutely prove that, but we all know that that is how politics works. When oppositions effectively campaign on an issue, governments very often have to give way. And so I welcome what was announced then about childcare, some childcare for 2-year-olds, and indeed what had previously been announced about 600 hours in the Children's Bill. But of course, the effect of the 600 hours, I think, was the effect on women's participation was a little bit overstated, I think, by John Swinney today. That's obviously one part of it, but the child development that Willie Rennie emphasised is clearly very important as well. Now, as with the bedroom tax, of course, the Scottish Government hasn't been able to resist making childcare a referendum issue as well, and I think we will continue to debate that over the next few months. All I would say today about that is that the chances of finding more money, if there was a yes vote in the early years of independence for childcare, are certainly no better than they are now. So let's get on with it now, has been what Labour has been saying. You need upfront money, even if you are going to have increased revenues from increased employment thereafter. And of course, on that other point, which in a sense is the fundamental referendum point on childcare in the White Paper, As I said in a previous debate, the benefits of increased employment in Scotland can just as well come to Scotland through the devolution of income tax and fiscal devolution more generally. So these arguments will go on, but let's today concentrate on two things. Firstly, let's implement the policies that we have agreed on the bedroom tax and on childcare. But finally, can I also congratulate my own frontbench colleagues, who I think have had a superb budget, have won all the demands that they made on the bedroom tax and some of the demands that they made on childcare for 2-year-olds.
Thanks so much. Now call on John Mason, to be followed by Ken McIntosh. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to take part in today's debate. I think there's a number of measures, some very topical ones, which we can all be positive about, like the primary 1 to 3 free school meals and the extension of childcare, and obviously the most recent move to cover the difference in bedroom tax. Now, I accept that bedroom tax is very much top of the political agenda at the moment, and is probably the most high-profile item, and certainly being debated widely today. And if we can resolve that, a lot of people are going to be very happy. However, we should not lose sight of other aspects of welfare reform which are hitting my constituents, and I assume those of other members. And these certainly include some very strange decisions on fitness for work, which my colleague Christina McKelvey already mentioned, when clearly a person is not fit for work, but they are being told they are. And another one I face is the imposition of sanctions for some very doubtful reasons, whereby somebody is suddenly left with absolutely no income at all. Now, clearly neither the Scottish Government nor Scottish Parliament is able to mitigate all of these and other aspects of welfare reform, or some other services would have to seriously suffer in compensation. Control over the full welfare budget and the related rules and regulations surely has to be a top priority for this Parliament moving forward. And I would be interested to hear from the other parties in the Chamber if they can guarantee, if Scotland was to vote no in September, that they would be able to transfer welfare powers to this Parliament, and whether even under devolution. Now, it strikes me that this is presumably the last budget where we will deal almost exclusively with expenditure, because next year we will also be thinking about taxation, namely landfill tax and the land and buildings transaction tax, and then the year after that, presumably, at very least, a share of income tax. So I think it's worth remembering that I think we can all agree that a responsible grown-up Parliament should have the responsibility for both taxation and expenditure. Now, obviously, we will have ample opportunity to discuss raising taxes in future, and the Finance Committee is currently looking at the Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill, which I personally have to say I find fascinating. This morning, we had Professor James Murley's at committee, and he certainly takes a very high-level view of tax systems. In his very lengthy Murley's review, he refers to a number of things about a good tax system and also the current UK tax system. And one table I found particularly interesting, under taxes on earnings, he said a good tax system, a progressive income tax with a transparent and coherent rate structure. The current UK system, however, an opaque jumble of different effective rates as a result of tapered allowances and a separate national insurance system. So I think I'd just like to put down a marker in this debate, as we don't really look very much at the taxes that we're raising, that when we come to next year's budget and the first discussions of tax as part of a budget, I very much hope that the Scottish Parliament will be able to do better than the UK has achieved so far. Now, one tax that we do have some influence over is council tax, so I wanted to mention it and to say that I particularly welcome the council tax freeze. Firstly, it is a bad tax to start with. It does not take into account ability to pay. Pensioners staying in the same house when they retire see the cost carry on as before, despite the fact their income has fallen. And if councils raise income tax, people struggling get hit even harder. Now, some people have said that they are relaxed about increasing council tax. I wonder who these people are. Well, I think some of them are people who are earning a lot, and that might include some of us. And council tax is easy. And those other group, it would be people on low incomes who are perhaps not paying council tax at all. So some of them would quite like the freeze to stop and for more services to be provided. But what about the people who are just coping in no more? And I reckon a number of them are in constituencies like mine. Ordinary, decent, hard-working people who have not seen a pay increase for a while, maybe have had their hours cut. They face most costs rising with inflation, and in the case of energy costs, rising much faster than inflation. So it can make a real difference to these people that their council tax has been frozen, and I very much welcome the fact that that is continuing. At risk of repeating last week's debate in the Commonwealth Games, I would like to say how much I value capital expenditure in the budget, both in the past, the present and going forward to the future, and what a difference that has made to the East End of Glasgow. On the sports side, in preparation for the Commonwealth Games, we have the Emirates Arena, we have the Tollcross Pool upgrade, we have the Hockey Centre, all which have provided construction jobs, ongoing jobs for local people and also facilities for local people. Housing is clearly one of the issues that I keep returning to, and again linked to the Commonwealth Games, we have the tremendous boost of the Games Village going to be available, providing jobs, improving the local area, which, as many people have known, has struggled, and also providing high-quality homes for local people. Transport is another issue which, again, I very much welcome. Providing jobs and construction, but also making it easier for people to travel to jobs. We've already seen that with the M74 completion, and now we have the commitment for some £415 million, which I believe is under the original budget, for the M8, M73, M74 motorway improvements, which is very welcome for jobs. Therefore, Presiding Officer, I very much welcome this budget. Of course, if we were not subsidising Westminster to the extent we are, we would have more resources here to do more with. However, that is sadly not currently the case, and I congratulate the Cabinet Secretary on the balance he has achieved with very tight resources.
Many thanks. Now calling Ken McIntosh to be followed by Jean Urquhart. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I read an attention-grabbing, if rather depressing, set of statistics this week. Over the last 3 decades, real incomes for accountants have risen by 60%, for lawyers by 114%, and for doctors by 153%. Over the same period, by comparison, incomes for bakers have fallen by 1%, and for unskilled factory workers by 3%. The figures reveal, I think, growing inequality to be a long-standing problem here in Scotland, in the United States, where it was the focus of President Obama's State of the Union address, and across most developed economies. In fact, there is an accompanying trend in that less and less of our overall economic output now goes on wages or labour costs, and more is paid out in profits. The growing gap this is creating was partially hidden when earnings were going up. But over the last 4 years, inflation has outstripped pay, and most households have felt the cost of the living squeeze directly. It has been particularly hard on those at the bottom, where rent, fuel and food price increases account for a larger share of spending. And this has only been compounded by UK government policy, which has seen a hike in taxes on spending and cuts to benefits. Now, it's against this background that I welcome not one, not two, but 3 Scottish Government announcements over the last few weeks of budget negotiations. The first, as highlighted by my colleague Malcolm Chisholm, was the allocation of additional funding for childcare. It's 6 years now since Wendy Alexander and the Labour Party outlined our plans to give every child a positive start, beginning with an extension of support to vulnerable 2-year-olds. The Liberal Democrats have also long shared that ambition, and I warmly welcome the moves the Scottish Government are now making in this direction. I didn't agree, actually, with everything he said in his speech last night, but I fully endorsed Willie Rennie in quoting the Nobel Prize winner James Heckman, that investment in a child's education before the age of 3 is the investment that gets the biggest return. I think that most Scots will be as pleased as I am that we can share our progressive vision, and I believe that no matter the outcome of the referendum, we can work together to deliver the transformational childcare that we want to see in Scotland through a devolved Scottish Parliament. The second announcement is, of course, the Cabinet Secretary's confirmation today that he'll meet our demands to find the full £50 million to effectively stop the bedroom tax here in Scotland. It has taken a little longer than we would have liked, but the consensus that clearly exists amongst Labour and SNP MSPs, that shared sense of anger and frustration against this unfair penalty on our poorest households, has now found its political expression. I want to thank all of those who have given voice to their frustration and even their despair at the effect of this punitive measure. The individuals who gave their testimony to the Parliament's Welfare Committee, those who led the campaign, including, for example, Alan Wiley, whose persuasive evidence, I think, was clearly one of the factors in persuading the Minister to change his mind. To Mike Daly, colleagues from the Govan Law Centre, and of course to my own colleague Jackie Bailey for highlighting what can and needs to be done. As our committee report highlighted, 80% of the homes affected by this measure include a disabled adult. In other words, this is a cut which specifically targets the most vulnerable in our society. Now, I know that most of us would rather we simply got rid of the measure altogether by getting rid of the Tory government, and that for SNP colleagues they would wish to do so through independence. But it is, to my mind, yet another example of why devolution works. This is an example of why and how devolution protects Scotland against the worst excesses of a Tory administration. We can say no to the bedroom tax, just as devolution allows us to say no to market forces in the NHS. And the final announcement I want to welcome is that of the £13 million for Scotland's colleges. Now, there's no point in pretending my welcome doesn't come with a caveat, in fact, several caveats. It is tricky to work out the figures exactly. It's fairly clear this week's funding does not make up for the cuts imposed over the last few Scottish budgets. In fact, I was asking Spice earlier, the £13 million is £6 million European social funding, £7 million match funding from the Scottish Funding Council, and it may be existing funds. However, it is welcome. But the Auditor-General revealed just recently that colleges across Scotland face an 11% real terms reduction in revenue grant funding from the Scottish Government between 2011-12 and 2014-15. This money still leaves us short. And what's that meant in real terms to real people? It's meant that more than 140,000 Scots who might have had the chance to go to college this year have been denied that chance. That's an incredible and utterly shameful figure. When the SNP came to power in 2007, there were 380,000 people, 380,000 Scots going to college that year, and it's now less than 240,000. So I do welcome the £13 million, but what I want to hear is that this marks a change of direction, that this government will finally put education first, because benefits are important in the short term, but what really matters in the long term is education. I began my remarks by highlighting what has happened to real incomes over the decades, the inequality gap that has opened up between the professional, the highly skilled and educated, and those workers without or the minimum of skills. We counter inequality. We close that gap by investing in training, skills and education. Only by improving our productivity, by building the knowledge economy, by giving people the skills and the confidence they need to flourish, will we truly prosper in this country. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Jean Urquhart, to be followed by Chick Brodie. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As always, I would like to pay tribute to the hard work not only of the Cabinet Secretary in putting this budget together, but the efforts of the Finance Committee clerking team in helping those of us on the committee to scrutinise this budget and to shed some light on the issues at hand. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to go over some of these issues at this Stage 3 debate. The Scottish Government, I think, has to be congratulated for producing a positive and ambitious budget despite the tough economic environment and Westminster's disastrous austerity agenda. Once again, vital components of Scotland's social wage have been protected: free prescriptions, free personal care and public transport for the elderly, and free university education. When household budgets are being squeezed by rising food prices and energy costs, these measures are not only welcome but necessary. As a Finance Committee member, I am particularly pleased that the Scottish Government has strengthened its commitment to prevention, spending to stop social and health problems before they start, rather than relying on expensive cures once it's too late. This philosophy is increasingly being included in government strategy, and the budget includes £30 million over 2 years to support the voluntary sector's vital work in this area. However, I would say that far too many charities are still being given funding settlements for just 1 year at a time, and this makes it hard for charities to plan and to invest in future services. For example, the Badenoch and Strathspey Community Transport Scheme, which is extraordinarily good, faces an uncertain future, despite being an essential and well-used service by hundreds of people every week. We need to move to an expectation that funding for community projects will be for several years at a time, creating the security these brilliant voluntary sector services need and deserve. On a more general note, I was pleased to see so many parties voting for the principle of this budget at Stage 1, a testament, I think, to the Cabinet Secretary's ability and his determination to get the best deal he can for Scots of all walks of life. It also demonstrates that despite differences of opinion on Scotland's constitutional future, there is a solid majority in this Parliament that believes that there is such a thing as society, that you cannot slash and burn your way to a better economy, that a healthy economy is based not on how those at the very top weather the storm, but how those at the bottom are protected from the harsh winds of an economic storm that continues to wreak havoc on communities up and down Scotland. However, I am still angry, and angry that the bedroom tax was imposed on Scotland in the first place. I'm angry that other welfare cuts, driven by ideology and lacking compassion, are causing tens of thousands of Scots to turn to food banks. I'm angry that a party consistently and overwhelmingly rejected by the Scottish people for years continues to hold the purse strings. No matter what sterling work the Cabinet Secretary is able to do within the confines of our financial settlement, no matter how much we may agree with the second largest party in this place, the fact remains that until Scotland has full powers of any other nation, economic powers, there is only so much that can be done to counteract the me-first attitude of Westminster's right-wing orthodoxy. Jackie Baillie declared with great aplomb at the end of her speech, and I quote, and I hope I've got this correct, "Today we can vote to end the bedroom tax." Well, we can't. We simply cannot vote to end the bedroom tax. That's the point of wanting Scotland to have its independence. And hopefully people will see. I'll take an intervention.
Jackie Baillie.
I mean, would the member accept that because of the Scottish Government's actions by putting the £50 million on the table, we have effectively ended the bedroom tax in Scotland?
No, I would not accept that. Can't accept that at all. What we've done is mitigated some of the worst outcomes of the bedroom tax, but we have not ended the bedroom tax. In fact, Scotland's going to pay dearly, apparently, to the tune of possibly £50 million from other services in order to mitigate the bedroom tax. And let nobody be under any illusion that we have ended the bedroom tax. The Conservative speakers so far have mentioned that this budget, that a Cabinet Secretary has not mentioned the economy in terms of business, and that this is not a budget for business. But it seems to me, from all of the reports in some of the English, what I might choose to call the English papers as well as the Scottish, is that that is not the issue here today, is not the business community. The biggest thing that's hitting everybody's mailbox is the bedroom tax and the effects of that. The effects of that on housing associations, and potentially the effect of that on local authorities. So I recommend this budget highly. I also can only repeat what many others have said before me, that the only way to mitigate the bedroom tax is to abolish it, and the only guarantee of abolishing such a tax is to vote yes on the 18th of September. This budget lays the groundwork for a fairer and more prosperous Scotland, and I support the bill and the government in their efforts to ensure that all future budgets are able to freely set Scotland's priorities. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now, Clonchick Brodie, up to 5 minutes, please, Mr. Brodie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. An austerity cut matched by a time cut. I'm delighted to support in this debate today, and I will not rehearse all of the issues about welfare cuts, etc. Presiding Officer, any budget has to consider not just the present reduced expenditure, which many members have talked of, but future revenue streams and the economic recovery. The recovery in Scotland, however, is not a mirage happening in spite of austerity, but a reality pursued out of, I believe, finding a way to plan and invest for the future. That balance is not easy, but the optimisation of future opportunities, jobs and revenue, I believe, have been addressed as best they can in the straitened circumstances which meet this budget. The budget, like its recent predecessors, has, I believe, focused on innovation, initiative, productivity and investment. Investment not just in capital, as has been mentioned, but in our young people, and that is absolutely critical. And the incremental £125 million since 2012-13 promised for through 2014-15, supporting young people into work, is already working when one considers that youth unemployment has fallen by 34,000 since December 2011. So investment in people and young people is absolutely critical for our future, but also in the economic circumstances, so too is growth and improvement of our national asset base. The budget increase of capital spend of £8 billion over the next 2 periods are designed, I believe, to reflect that infrastructural benefit at a national level with national assets, be that on asset improvement or on efficiency projects, which will feed through from that capital investment. So, investment in employment and training our young, in developing efficiency and productivity, and in improving revenue-supporting infrastructure, all of these, I believe, have been done in this budget in the face of the most adverse of circumstances. And I, for one, am not one of these that believe that the current recovery will continue forever. Above all, I believe, Presiding Officer, has to be the investment in that, but above all has to be the investment in the creation of wealth, in business and revenue opportunities. For one example, let's take tourism, which is, after all, an export activity. In the shape of this year, all of this year's major events, the Homecoming, the Commonwealth Games, the Ryder Cup, will generate income and jobs, and investment like that will not just be for this year, but it will be capitalised on in future years. And for the benefit of the Leader of the Opposition, high-level marketing and selling abroad is an investment for the future. I have only 5 minutes. I'm sorry, I can't. There are other things like the business rates relief, which the Cabinet Secretary referred to, and the retention of the small business bonus scheme, like the SME growth programme, supported by £38 million of financial and also supported with £53 million of financial transaction loan facilities. And there's also the Scottish Investment Bank support for export and high-growth companies with loans that exist from £250,000 to £2 million. So, also then is continued support for the enterprise agencies, which last year had 118 offers of regional selective assistance, with planned capital expenditure of £216 million, safeguarding nearly 500 jobs and supporting and boosting also the third sector and social enterprises. All, Presiding Officer, all of it, designed to support an investment-led recovery while balancing the needs of an austerity mitigating expenditure programme. Now, I'm not known for being sycophantic, but this Cabinet Secretary has produced a big square from a very small circle, again. And as with the bedroom tax, one thing that this has shown is that all of us, by working together, and certainly this applies to Labour and Lib Dems, working together with the Scottish Government in the interests of Scotland, things, funnily enough, can be so much better. Thank you, President Officer.
Thank you very much for your brevity. And we now move to the closing speeches, but before I do, I'd like to make my apologies to the final speaker, who we couldn't call on this debate. Now call on Gavin Brown. 6 minutes, please, Mr Brown.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me just begin by picking up on one of the issues that came into the debate several times, first of all from the Cabinet Secretary and then from others, including Jamie Hepburn. It's a statistic used a number of times by the Scottish Government over the last couple of years, and it's their contention that the cost-to-benefit changes is £4.5 billion, and the suggestion is made by the Scottish Government that life would be very different if we were to be independent. Now, the question I asked the Cabinet Secretary in his opening speech was how much of that £4.5 billion worth of changes would be reversed were Scotland to be independent. The reason I asked that because from the White Paper there are 2 or 3 measures that they say they would reverse, but they are completely silent on all of the other measures, and apart from that they say they would broadly adopt the welfare system from the rest of the UK. The largest single measure within that £4.5 billion figure, which is about a third of it in total, was the change from RPI to CPI. Is there a commitment from the Scottish Government to reverse that if we are to be independent? Because if not, then a third of that £4.5 billion has to come away from their criticism. The second largest measure was the changes to child benefit. Is there any commitment to reverse that decision? I don't think there is, because I heard Christine Graham ask the First Minister a couple of months ago about this, and no commitment was given. If that is the Scottish Government position, then they cannot complain about that sum of money either. So I think if we drill it down, out of the £4.5 billion, I think I'd be surprised if there are more than a couple of £100 million out of that figure that there is any commitment whatsoever from the Scottish Government to reverse were we to be independent. I look forward to hearing which additional measures they would change. Otherwise, I don't think it is legitimate at all to use that figure going forward when they know fine well most of it they simply wouldn't change if they had the power to do so. Deputy Presiding Officer, we have said from the very outset that this should have been a budget about the economy. I disagree with Jean Urquhart where she said she didn't think it was the biggest issue. In my view, in poll after poll, people out there at the very top of their agenda is jobs, growth and the economy, and that's where I think our focus really ought to be. We hear from the government that if they had the powers, they would set a business tax strategy to stimulate investment. Now, if they're to be taken at their word with that, why do they not do that with the tax powers that they currently have? I've said before in this chamber that I thought in their first session of government they had a pretty good innings when it came to tax, particularly in relation to the small business bonus. But since becoming a majority government, I think it's been a very different position. Happy to give way.
Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, but doesn't Gavin Brown accept that we have extended the small business bonus over the years, and now over 90,000 small businesses receive the benefit of it and pay low or no business rates to a maximum relief of £4,620 per annum. How much lower is that relief in England?
Gavin Brown.
He always shouts very loudly when he doesn't have a particularly strong point to make, Deputy Presiding Officer. The increase, as he well knows, the increase to the small business bonus in financial terms, in terms of this budget, is about £4.5 million. If you allow me to continue, First Minister, I will do so. The increase is £4.5 million. The increase in Barnett consequentials that they get is far more than £4.5 million. It's about £80 to £90 million of the Barnett consequentials they get came from business rates. And what has happened in this second term, in the majority term of government, we brought in the retail levy. We brought in empty property rates, a big advantage we used to have over the rest of the UK. We diminished enormously. A refusal to publish the land and building transaction tax rates. We have a business incentivisation scheme set up that just hasn't got off the ground at all, and we're blaming COSLA for that as opposed to the Scottish Government. And of course, the retail rebate, a measure that will be brought in south of the border, a measure for which we get Barnett consequentials of £29 million next year and £39 million the year after. Yet we have refused to look at it. We have refused to bring in a boost to the retail sector at a time when it's needed and at a time when we had a retail levy which actually gave them a tougher position than the rest of the UK. So, Deputy Presiding Officer, the focus has not been on the economy from this government in relation to this budget. There are a number of measures they could have taken in relation to tax. They could have brought back the Town Centre Regeneration Fund, a very popular fund, one which had support right across this chamber when it was brought in, and one which has been quoted by a large number of SNP backbenchers over the last 12 months or so. Why are we not doing anything about that? Deputy Presiding Officer, the focus has been on welfare reform over the course of most of this debate. We've exposed, I think, some of the questions that need to be answered by the Scottish Government in relation to that. What exactly have they been doing over the last 12 months? Because they certainly haven't been looking at some of the ways they could have dealt with issues and some of the powers that they already had. Because there's not a focus on the economy, that is why we will not be supporting this budget come decision time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call on Jenny Mara. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In 1999, we voted for a Scottish Parliament because we recognised that there are times where we would want to do things differently in Scotland. And never has that been more significant than right now on this issue of the bedroom tax. If passed today, Labour's amendment would mitigate the effects of the bedroom tax in Scotland. Now, this amendment follows a series of negotiations to the point today where the full sum to mitigate the bedroom tax is in the Cabinet Secretary's budget. Now, first of all, Presiding Officer, in the draft budget, there was nothing for the bedroom tax. Then at stage 1, there was 20 million. And now the full amount the government initially said was not possible because it would let Westminster off the hook is in the budget today. And we are very glad about that. But we did it by working together across parties to negotiate a common ground. And Mr Swinney was clear that work remains to be done on an alternative scheme in the event of the DWP refusing to lift the cap. Now, discussions between us on this so far have been very constructive and included a willingness that they continue to push forward development of that scheme together. Now, in her speech earlier this afternoon, Jackie Bailey asked the Cabinet Secretary to confirm his willingness to continue to meet us, but he did not do so at that point. And I wonder if perhaps the Cabinet Secretary will intervene on me now and confirm that he is willing to continue to meet with us and work together on this. Okay. I will thank you, Cabinet Secretary. You will address that later.
Address your comments through the chair, please.
Sorry, Presiding Officer. Can I turn to some of the other comments that were made earlier in the debate? Linda Fabiani questioned the legality for housing associations to take measures to mitigate the bedroom tax. East Lothian Housing Association has already done this, and this has been approved by lawyers. And Renfrewshire Council has also done similar, and it has been approved and audited by Audit Scotland. I'll take the intervention.
I would like to thank the member for giving way. I think she misunderstands. I understand that, and I know how that's working. What I'm concerned about are small community-based organisations that operate under specific rules and where there are voluntary committee members who may be legally liable. And I wonder if that ability to write off arrears that are solely due to bedroom tax would not therefore kick into having to write off arrears perhaps that are due to other punishing welfare measures that come. I'm concerned that people could end up in trouble here, and I just want to be sure that it's properly investigated.
Jenny Mara.
Thank you. I thank the member for her intervention. It's my understanding that East Lothian Housing Association does have voluntary members, but I'm sure that the Cabinet Secretary and our members who have been working very hard on this know the ways of managing to do this, and the amendment tonight makes that clear. Can I turn to Murdo Fraser's comments in this debate, because he said that his own council, Perth and Kinross, only spent 14% of discretionary housing payments. And I think there has to be some recognition in this debate that to this point of this debate today, some councils in Scotland have been better than others at letting tenants know what support is available, and perhaps he'd like to take that up with the councils in his region. He made some comments also about the local housing allowance, which Malcolm Chisholm addressed, the difference. But let me just clarify for Murdo Fraser. Let's be clear about this. We are here in this debate today because the Conservative government has imposed the bedroom tax right across the United Kingdom. And when this proposal was presented to Alistair Darling by civil servants in Westminster when he was Chancellor, Alistair Darling handed it back to the civil servants and he said no Labour government would do this. But when they handed this same proposal to George Osborne, he grabbed it with both hands and put the bedroom tax on Scotland and right across the United Kingdom.
I'm very grateful to Jenny Malley for giving way. Can you answer me this very simple question? Does the local housing allowance introduced by the Labour Party incorporate an under-occupancy charge? Yes or no?
Jenny Malley.
Malcolm Chisholm's comments to Murdo Fraser were very, very clear on this point. And that tax did not affect sitting tenants, and that is the key difference here. Murdo Fraser can try and deflect from his Conservative government policy of the bedroom tax all he likes, but we know that it is that side of the chamber that are responsible for this iniquitous tax in Scotland and across the United Kingdom. Presiding Officer, we must now, as a Parliament, not fail those whose hopes have been built up in this process of negotiation by falling back on any arguments about the Constitution or anything else. The interests of Scots have been captured by this consensus, and today a reasoned amendment gives us the chance to show that we are capable of putting aside our differences for one day in the name of permanently mitigating the effects of this iniquitous policy in Scotland. To simply oppose the bedroom tax is to maintain it. We must walk a different road. We must find a different way. That is what this Parliament was created to do. When Donald Dewar opened the Scottish Parliament in 1999, he said, "We will make mistakes, but we will never lose sight of what brought us here. The striving to do right by the people of Scotland, to respect their priorities, to better their lot, and to contribute to the common weal." So when we vote today, let's not simply vote to reject the Tory bedroom tax, a mistake in every sense. Let's vote to do what really matters, to make life that little bit easier for Scots who are suffering now. With the political will, the dedication, the time and effort of the Scottish Government, we can make the effects of the bedroom tax history. Presiding Officer, the Cabinet Secretary has come this far. We know he can cross the finish line. We know he can deliver. He can ease the anxiety of those whose arrears are growing, stop the worry for those who cannot afford to pay this tax, remove the stigma for those who simply want to stay in their homes, the homes they have lived in for years and in the communities they love. He and we can better their lot. He can build upon the common weal. Let us not rest on the mistakes of others, but confound them by the strength of the values on which our Parliament is built. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call on John Swinney to wind up the debate on behalf of the Government. Mr Swinney, you have until 5 o'clock.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There have been two major themes to this debate, and I want to address them both, Presiding Officer. The first is the discussion about whether or not this budget is sufficiently focused on delivering the economic recovery that is required in Scotland, and the second is around the issue of the bedroom tax. And let me take those in order. The Conservatives have been consistent through this budget process in criticising the budget as being insufficient in terms of dealing with the economy, and I've listened with great care to all the contributions made by Mr Brown and Mr Fraser during both of the plenary stages of the budget process, at the suggestions that they have made about how the budget could have been strengthened to make it better, to pass the Tory test, if we put it at that. And what they've come up with in the course of these speeches in these two debates has been that I should not have applied the retail levy, that I should have given a £2,000 bonus to certain pubs and shops over a 2-year period, and I should have had a town centre regeneration fund. And that's it. That's all the Conservative Party have come up with as alternative suggestions to the measures that I'm setting forward on the economy. And I'll give way to Mr Brown. If he wants to now take, at the last minute, to make up another list.
If he checks the record, he'll also see empty property tax, publication of LBTT rates, and indeed a big extension to the business rates incentivisation scheme. So he's only mentioned half the ones that we mentioned on the record.
Well, you see, my point about business rates and the business tax regime is that I want the regime in Scotland to be superior, advantageous to that in the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, Mr Brown has argued that I should be mimicking what goes on in the rest of the UK. And if I was Mr Johnson, the heavyweight from the back benches, says I should be mimicking them, I should follow them. Well, as I have rehearsed with Mr Brown already, I should be leaving Parliament to go back up to my office and require businesses in Scotland to repay money that we have made available to them by having a more advantageous business rates regime in Scotland. And as for the business rates incentivisation scheme, I've got a letter in front of me sent to me on the 17th of June 2013 by the spokesperson for Resources and Capacity at COSLA, Councillor Kevin Keenan, asking me not to take action on the business rates incentivisation scheme until a proper evaluation of the full audited figures for 2012-13 are available, and that will not be available until the spring of 2014. So perhaps Mr Brown would... Well, I'm being very generous to Mr Brown. I'll give way another time to Mr Brown.
He is being very generous, but I mean, this was a policy he published in 2011. Is he seriously blaming COSLA for the fact that nothing has happened on it since then?
What I'm saying is that I've made a proposal to COSLA, and I can't reach agreement with COSLA because COSLA want to delay until the audited figures are available. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm simply explaining I've not managed to get to agreement with COSLA on the publication of the numbers. And that's the problem that's at the heart of this. Now, Mr Brown has told us, he told us at stage 1 that he wasn't going to vote for the budget. He's told us at stage 3 that he's not going to vote he's not going to vote for the budget. Let me just read to Mr Brown something from the official report from the 4th of February 2009. In the good old days. In the good old days when Mr Crawford and I worked together to keep the Conservatives on the straight and narrow when it came to budget issues. And there we had it. And there we had it. Mr Derek Brownlee. Ah, yes, Mr Derek Brownlee. Don't we all miss him? That was when we had quality in the Conservative group. Mr Brownlee said, as we pointed out last week to the Labour Party and others, voting down the budget has serious consequences for public services, council tax levels and small businesses. Wasn't Mr Brownlee correct? Yeah. Here the Conservatives are going to vote against a budget jeopardising public services, council tax levels and small businesses. What an absurdity has become the Conservative Party in Scotland. I've got to do justice to the other issue in the debate today. I think we've done enough justice to the Conservative Party and their folly. Now, on the bedroom tax issues, a lot of points have been raised about what actions the government has taken to try to secure the increase in the cap on discretionary housing payments. And I think it's important I put this material on the record properly. At a meeting on the 6th of March 2013, well, I should say, first of all, that the bedroom tax was introduced in April 2013. So when David Mundell says that we should have been acting for the 3 years to deal with the consequences of the bedroom tax, it's a little bit imaginative to think how we could have been acting for 3 years when it's only been in operation for the best part of 10 months. So that's the first point. The second point is that on the 6th of March 2013, my colleague, the Minister for Housing and Welfare, Margaret Burgess, met with Lord Freud, and I accept that she did not ask at that meeting for an increase in the cap. What Margaret Burgess asked for was the abolition of the bedroom tax. That's what Margaret Burgess asked for. And at a meeting on the 18th of June 2013, the Deputy First Minister met Lord Freud, and at that meeting she asked for an increase in discretionary housing payments on the 18th of June 2013. And thankfully, as a result of that meeting, there was an increase in discretionary housing payments, and they were increased also for rural local authorities. Now, what we've been doing subsequent to that is that we've been monitoring discretionary housing payments, and it has become apparent, as has been made clear to Parliament, that some local authorities are very close to or have allocated all of the discretionary housing payments available to them. Now, one of the reasons why the cap has to be increased is so that we can have a better distribution of discretionary housing payments to meet need in the relevant parts of the country where the caseload arises. And that is why we asked the Department for Work and Pensions to increase the cap, or to lift the cap, I should say, and also to enable us to put in more resources into this issue. The other reason why we've not been asking for the lifting of the cap is that my colleagues have quite rightly been trying to get the DWP to put more money into the system. Why? Because we shouldn't be putting money out of devolved public expenditure into mopping up the mess left by the welfare reform of the United Kingdom government. So, in short, my colleagues have been focused on, first of all, securing abolition of the bedroom tax. Secondly, about increasing funding by the DWP to pick up the pieces of their mess, rather than using our money to pick up the pieces of their mess. And thirdly, we have been arguing for the increase in the cap. And I hope that the cap is increased as a consequence of the representations that we have made. Now, of course, we've taken this action, and I've signalled that if we are unsuccessful in securing an increase in the cap, the government will work to put in place an alternative scheme whereby we can deal with the writing off of debt that individuals have acquired. Now, I intervened on Ian Gray, and I'm glad Mr Gray confirmed to me what is my view, which is that it is better, if at all possible, to avoid people getting into debt in the first place. That is why the cap has to be increased, so that we can avoid people getting into debt. Now, I commend Renfrewshire Council, I commend East Lothian Council for coming up with debt write-off schemes in relation to their relationship with their social tenants. We don't have that relationship in government. We do not fund these individuals. We don't have any direct relationship with them. The debt is held by the authority or the housing association with that individual. So, yes, I commend them for doing that. But I make it absolutely crystal clear to Parliament that the government's view is that we must prioritise in lifting the cap to increase discretionary housing payments to enable us to avoid people falling into debt, because falling into debt is a disaster for individuals in these social circumstances. Now, Presiding Officer, in the course of the debate, a lot of people have said that I was wrong in the budget in September to say that I didn't want to make provision at that time because it would let Westminster off the hook. And I make no apology for that statement to Parliament, because I do not believe it is right and proper for the Scottish Government to have to use devolved public expenditure to clear up the mess that has been created by decisions taken elsewhere. I find that thoroughly unacceptable in Scotland. And I'm not the only one that finds that unacceptable. Yesterday, in the Welsh Assembly, the Leader of Plaid Cymru asked the Welsh First Minister, who's a Labour First Minister, by the way, will the Scottish Government join in the cause of the Scottish Government to lift the cap on discretionary housing payments? And the Welsh First Minister, Labour, said, of course, there's the issue of why devolved government should be paying for what is the responsibility of non-devolved government. There is a sense of hazard there. And Carwyn Jones says it all for me on this one very limited occasion. It is absolutely ridiculous that a devolved Parliament should pick up the pieces for Westminster. We should have the power to make our own decisions and to create a fair welfare system for the people of our country.
That concludes the debate on the Budget Scotland No. 3 bill. We now move to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 8946. In the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a business programme. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 8946.
Moved.
No member has asked to speak against the motion, therefore I now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 8946, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 8947, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a Stage 1 timetable for the Revenue Scotland and Taxpayers Bill. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 8947.
Moved.
No member has asked to speak against the motion, therefore I now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 8947, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. There are two questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is amendment number 8914.1, in the name of Ian Gray, which seeks to amend motion number 8914 in the name of John Swinney on the Budget Scotland No. 3 bill, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. We move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 8914.1 in the name of Ian Gray is as follows. Yes, 108. No, 15. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 8914 in the name of John Swinney as amended on the Budget Scotland No. 3 bill be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. We move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion number 8914 in the name of John Swinney as amended is as follows. Yes, 108. No, 15. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed to. And the Budget Scotland No. 3 bill is passed. That concludes the decision time. We now move to members' business. Members who leave the chamber should do so quickly and quietly.